Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Sabrina Kofer, and on behalf of Choice and ACRL, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Addressing Environmental Challenges at Nature Reviews, which is sponsored by Springer Nature. This session is one in a series of sponsored webinars from Choice and ACRL that addresses new ideas and developments of interest to the academic library community. I'll just put a couple links in the chat where you can register for upcoming webinars and watch previous webinar recordings. Before we get started, I'd like to point out just a few features of the webinar software. All attendees who join the presentation are automatically muted and your cameras are off, so don't worry about generating any noise or feedback. We've got that taken care of for you. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. To adjust the size of the slides or video, you can use the divider in the middle of the screen to slide the sizes to your liking. We are using the Q&A feature today. Please use it to submit any questions or comments for our speakers. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation, so please do type your questions into the Q&A module as they occur to you. You can also use the upvote feature to highlight questions you like or would like to be addressed. Also, there's closed captioning available for today's session. To toggle the automated captions on or off, please use the CC button on the bottom panel of your screen. Last, please note that we are recording today's program, and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archived version and where to access today's slides. And with that, we're ready to get started, so I will hand it over to Jill.
Thank you, Sabrina. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for having us here today and joining the webinar. So I have the pleasure of introducing the webinar to you. We are addressing environmental grand challenges at Nature Reviews. Let me first start with some introductions. So my name's Jill. I'm the head of publishing strategy at Nature Portfolio. I've been in this role for about 6 or 7 years, and my focus is really working on developing and supporting new launch journals within the Nature Portfolio. But really, the best thing about my role is the people that I work with. And I'm lucky enough to work with both Laura and Alex, who are my co-speakers for today. Laura is the chief editor of Nature Reviews Clean Technology, which we'll hear more about in the next part of this webinar. Having previously worked at Nature Reviews Earth and Environment, Nature Communications, and also joining my team as a senior publishing manager as well, Laura has a wealth of experience as an editor and across new launches, particularly at the front line and also behind the scenes. Laura's based in London, as you know. Alex is the chief editor of Nature Reviews Biodiversity. She's also spent time at Nature Communications, Nature Ecology and Evolution for a while, Nature Reviews Earth and Environment as well, and an advisory editor for NPJ Biodiversity, which I didn't know, actually. As Laura, Alex also has a wealth of editorial experience, and it'll be really interesting to hear their perspectives today on their new launch journals. And as we know, Alex is based in New York. So let me jump in and get started. I'm just going to give maybe 10 or 11 minutes, a quick overview onto new launches, Nature Reviews, and how we support the Sustainable Development Goals. So very light touch. And then I'll hand over to Laura, who will talk about her journal, Nature Reviews Clean Technology. And then we'll hand over to Alex to cover Nature Reviews Biodiversity. And at the end of that, we're very happy to take your questions. Let's jump in. So 2025 marks just over a decade of the Nature New Launches programme. So this is very exciting. So since 2015, we've launched 33 new journals, of which 11 of those are new Nature Reviews journals. And that includes Nature Reviews Clean Technology and Nature Reviews Biodiversity. And in 2026, we'll be launching 2 more. Those are Nature Health and Nature Sensors. So why are we launching so many journals, and what's our strategy? Why do we launch them? Well, we want to offer more author choice. We want to serve the wider research communities of authors that we don't already serve. And what's the strategy? Well, there are lots of strategies, but if I had to summarize them, some of the time it's filling really obvious gaps. So where there's a lot of publications, for example, and a lack of high impact or high quality journals where these papers can be published, for example, that's why we launched Nature Cancer. Also, as I mentioned, expanding into new research communities. So, for example, the Nature Reviews, we had a lot of life sciences and clinical sciences Nature Reviews for a long time. And with the new launch program, we've moved into physical sciences and social sciences. I'll talk more about that on the next slide. And then importantly, establishing new thematic journals, that's what we call them in-house. So it's a theme. So they're really usually interdisciplinary journals. And they're pulling in lots of different voices on one theme. So whatever that theme may be, if it's aging, food, water, or cities. So those are some examples of those thematic journals, and they tend to address an SDG or a sustainable development goal. And we'll talk about that later as well in more detail. So if we look at the Nature Reviews in a bit more detail, these are the 26 Nature Reviews journals that we have, including, of course, Clean Technology and Biodiversity, which we're going to be focusing on today. So while they're arranged into really neat categories on this slide, actually, some of them are multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary. And so they kind of straddle quite a few of these categories. But these are the ones that we have. So important question. What's the difference between the Nature Reviews journals and the research journals within the portfolio? So I don't know how much knowledge, but I'll go a quick overview. The Nature Research journals are the journals with just not reviews in their name. So it's like Nature Genetics or Nature Biotechnology or Bioengineering, that type of thing. Whereas the Nature Reviews all have, of course, reviews in their name. And one important difference is the Nature Research journals are hybrid journals. So you have the option of publishing OA or subscription. The Nature Reviews journals are subscription-only journals. And there's a good reason for that. It's because of the intense craftsmanship that goes into creating each review. Again, we're going to hear a bit more about that a bit later on. Research journals, they publish original research, so primary research. So that's any research reporting original findings or new data, and it's submitted directly from the authors to the journal of choice. Editors read every paper, and they make a decision whether or not to send something to peer review. They do also publish some reviews and some news and some opinion content as well, but it's a minority. The Nature Reviews journals, on the other hand, really focus on the creation and the craftsmanship, I think that's a good word for it, of review articles. And those summarize the primary research. So they draw upon multiple primary research articles, for example, multiple sources to give an overview or sometimes a story of the field. And they are really useful. So there's lots of reasons why those are useful. They can support and provide an understanding of a complex multidisciplinary research field. They can give you a clear view of a topic without having to do all of the wider reading. So it saves researchers time and understanding. And it enables them to explain topics to non-specialists and, importantly, to students. So it's often used as a teaching tool. So to find out what our readers thought about our review articles, and other non-primary content as well, we conducted a study towards the end of 2022. This was run by Nature Portfolio, and it surveyed researchers visiting our websites and also includes some interviews as well. And we wanted to see how they interact with some of the content. So as you can see here, the top 3 motivations for reading non-primary content, so that could be, it's mostly reviews, but it could also be a news article or an opinion piece, was learning about the broader research activities in my field. So being informed more widely. The second one was informing my own research. And the third was keeping up to date with research beyond my field, because we know with the sheer volume of publications being published, this is often quite difficult to do. There were very few differences by the region, so where the researcher was based or what role they had. So that was quite interesting to see. Also quite interesting was the 4% was for entertainment purposes, or that was at least some of the answers, which I thought was quite fun. So let me move on to the Sustainable Development Goals and introduce those. These are the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development adopted by the United Nations members in 2015. And they created 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And you'll see they're displayed here. We've got a poll coming up. Let me just talk about the slide and then I'll talk about the poll. They're displayed here in this image. The goals are actually split into 3 categories. Often they're not, they're just displayed all together. But here we have the biosphere, and then on top of that is society, and then on top of that is economy. So each is dependent on the last. And the goals are divided between those. And the reason I liked this image about the Sustainable Development Goals is because goals 6, 13, 14, and 15 in the bottom, the biosphere, if we include them along with the very important goal 7, that's clean and affordable energy in society, those are the focus of the new launches that we're hearing from today. Why is this important? It's important because the research community are increasingly tackling social and environmental challenges. And we know that they're not on track to be met by 2030, but publishers are in a really unique position to help accelerate this progress. And on the next slide, I'm going to show you what publishers can do to accelerate this progress. But I just wanted to show you that the poll has come up to ask what extent do the SDGs influence you or your patrons' responsibilities and decision-making processes? And the results are here. So that's really interesting to see. So we've got significantly is 11%, moderately 26%, sorry. We're aware of them, but they don't currently influence our decision. It was about 37%. We're not currently using SDGs in our decision process, but are open to exploring that is 26%. And then 0% for not at all. That's really interesting. Thank you for filling that out. It's really nice to see. If I go on to the next slide, what can publishers do to help support the SDGs or for a sustainable future? There are 3 things that Springer Nature can do. And the first 2 kind of covered by new launches. So that's why I've included them here. The first one is publish content. So of course, if we have a home for that kind of content, so a home for researchers to publish their research that's relevant to Sustainable Development Goals, that's the first step. So launching new journals that will publish this type of research is one of the most important things we can do. And then also making sure that it can be accessed as well and curate that content for the benefit of everyone. And thirdly, being a role model. So advocating role model best practices for a sustainable future as well, which SN has an annual report on that we can check out if you want more information. I wasn't going to mention any more detail on that for this webinar. So I'm blitzing through my slides because I don't want to keep you too much longer, but that was an introduction to the SDGs. And this slide is very similar to the first few ones we showed because this shows sort of the chronological order, so how we launch the new launches and which SDGs each one publishes research towards. And you can see year by year, each one does try to address various SDGs on here as well. So that plays a key role when we're deciding what the scope of the new launches should be. So really importantly here, I've pulled out Nature Reviews Biodiversity and Nature Reviews Clean Technology as the 2025 new launches and the SDGs that they cover. My final slide. How do we know if the stuff that we're publishing actually has an impact? So we could launch a new journal and we could say this is covering SDG 1, but how do we know that that's actually going to do what we want it to do? Well, there's one way of finding out, and we can sort of track policy mentions. So when our content is cited by a policy document, we can track those policy mentions and see who's citing us, what document is this, and what has it contributed to? What is the policy that it has contributed to? So that's what we do. If we look at the Nature Reviews alone, there was over 6,000 citations to that content between 2005 and 2025. And you can see the years that those articles that were cited in the top plot, you can see when they were published. So you can see there's a lag between when they were published and when they're cited, as you might expect, because the citing policy publication years is on the bottom there. So this is global, it's across 96 different countries, and it's mostly government level. So around 50% of those documents were policy papers from national government or others, but also authored by NGOs and some think tanks as well. And the Nature new launches, not just the Nature Reviews new launches, but the Nature Research Journals new launches are heavily represented in these high impact SDG spaces for policy. And one last thing is that a lot of them We don't cover all the SDGs, but there's a lot of them in the SDGs that we mentioned earlier. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Laura.
Great. Thank you so much, Jill, for that really nice introduction. As Jill mentioned, I'm Laura Zinke. I'm the chief editor of Nature Review's Clean Technology. Technology has kind of a funny role when it comes to the SDGs. On the one hand, technology has caused a lot of the issues that have led to specific SDG targets. We have a huge impact on the environment through things like energy generation or industrial processes or building societies. But at the same time, technology has a big role in addressing the SDGs and in really pushing progress towards them. So in doing this, we need to think about what sort of technologies we can create that are going to be what we would call clean, or at least cleaner technologies that are going to provide key progress towards the SDGs, including energy access for everyone, allowing for consumption of consumer goods that we all need and use every day, key industrial processes, for instance, creating things that we use for building cities and society, and also for things like transportation and infrastructure. The issues that the SDGs are addressing are really broad, so we really need interdisciplinary work across physical and environmental and social sciences, as well as engineering and business. And within that, technology covers all of these different areas. The thing is, though, there's so much information out there. There's already been a lot of effort and a lot of success in bringing out clean technologies, so things like solar panels or electric vehicles. But with all of that success and all that information, it's also really overwhelming trying to keep up. When I was working with Jill on the publishing team and thinking about areas where there's been a lot of progress and where there's a lot of research interest, I was just stunned by how many publications there were in this area every year. And so even for experts who are working in topics like in photovoltaics or batteries or different types of chemical engineering that are aiming towards making better products in better ways, there's a lot of debate and it's really hard to keep up. One thing that's been particularly striking about the field, say, in terms of energy science or sustainability science, is the field can be really prone to hyperbole. There's a lot of claims that are being made, both scientific and by other companies about, what's sustainable or what's not. You might be familiar with terms like greenwashing and things like that. And some of the stuff that contributes to this is that there's just a lot of information in these really rapidly moving fields. And sometimes the information is coming out so quickly, it can be really hard for researchers and then also policymakers, folks in industry, and folks in society to keep track and distill what people are talking about and how and why. One of the other things that we see a lot in terms of decarbonizing society is that a lot of the research communities are often siloed. So for instance, you have folks who are working specifically on material science or chemistry on a bench scale, but then in taking something from the bench scale out into the real world, there are a lot of different steps along the way. And you really need to be able to work through this in a community way. And like I mentioned, there's a lot of disagreement over different technologies and how we should implement something. So even though there's general agreement, especially within some research communities about where we need to go, say reaching specific efficiency targets or how we generate clean energy, the actual path and process to get there can be, there's a lot of different discussion about the best way to do that. So that's where we came in. One thing that we're really passionate about as a journal is trying to bring together all these different topics and these experts into one journal so that there's a place for folks even from different fields or from different research backgrounds or different research positions, whether that's in traditional academic settings or more industry or policy influence settings, to have a spot where they can discuss these things and they have a place to go to for really reliable, digestible information. What we do is we publish around 50 reviews a year, and we also publish quite a few opinion and short commentary articles. And these will be across clean technology topics. Now, what clean technology is can be a bit, there's not a super strict definition. So I like to give some examples of some of the things we cover. One of the main things we cover is really focus on that SDG 7 about clean energy. Clean energy production, transmission, and storage is going to be one of the key ways that we, as a society, can still provide energy and electricity and things that we all need, but in a way that has a lower impact. So that's a major focus of the journal. Another major focus is on decarbonizing industrial processes. So this can mean creating the same product as we're using today, but doing it in a way that, say, releases fewer greenhouse gas emissions or releases less pollution to the environment or uses fewer materials. Or that could be creating a fundamentally different product that's more sustainable in some way, but perhaps with a process that's more environmentally friendly. Another key area that we think often gets overlooked and that we're really passionate about at Nature Reviews Clean Technology is thinking about the infrastructure around us. Clean water is a really key SDG, but water treatment and water handling actually can have some pretty broad environmental impacts. And there's a lot of really interesting research out there on how to provide clean water in a way that doesn't cause other downstream impacts. And there's also a lot of interesting work on how we can build buildings that are, say, more energy efficient or going to work better with the natural environment. And that's something we're really interested in, as well as, of course, low emission transportation. So things like electric vehicles, but also more sustainable shipping or sustainable aviation. One thing that we've been really struck by is how many technologies exist on the small scale. So say they've been demonstrated in somebody's lab, but then taking something from a lab or even a product that has been demonstrated on quite a small scale, but out in the real world, and moving that towards something where you can, say, go buy it off the shelf and have it installed at home, or is used on a really broad scale to make products that we can, see out on the street somewhere. There's a lot of steps along the way, and a lot of different research is going into how we do that. So that's something we're really passionate about at the journal, is tracking this. You may think of it as lab to fab or commercial scale up of different clean technologies. And then once technologies are out there, they can have major societal impacts. And there's a lot of work on policy and interactions with taking technologies from lab into the real world, and then from there, what happens. So what we do at the journal is, with our reviews, we try to provide really up-to-date and realistic overviews. Like I mentioned, this is a really important field. It touches on lots of different aspects of the Sustainable Development Goals. But as I also mentioned, there's a lot of work in this field that maybe overpromises or oversells something. And the fields also just move really quickly. So these aren't an exhaustive list, but I brought out a few of the different types of reviews we publish. Some of them are more technology focused. So for instance, I have something, a screen grab here of a figure from one of our recent articles on opaque photovoltaics. So if you have a solar panel, but you can see through it a bit, but maybe not all the way, you can actually make that different colors, which is really interesting. And that means you can make some really pretty things on buildings that are also generating electricity for the building. But there's a trade-off there. And in this article, the authors were discussing some of these different trade-offs and when you might want to balance one, how it looks versus over efficiency and things like that. As I mentioned in the last slide, taking things from a smaller scale projects into, a large real world scenario, there's a lot at play in terms of systems. So we also publish reviews that are more systems focused. So having a think about what are we going to do once we put something out into the real world? How should we best use it? And what's that going to do to the broader system? So for instance, we have a example here on roles for hydrogen in the future energy transition, which is a field where there's thousands of papers published every year, but they are some are very optimistic and others are less so. And here the authors had a chance to go through and really give their expert opinion based on the literature in terms of where the best uses of hydrogen are. Finally, we have reviews that are more society focused. These get more into social sciences, business, and policy. So for instance, we had a review discussing carbon dioxide removal governance and how different stakeholders within this process would interact. When we have reviews on specific technologies, one thing we're really passionate about and that we think is a feature of the journal that we sometimes miss from other publications is we ask for the authors to discuss things about sustainability and implementation of these technologies. So for instance, we might ask authors to discuss emissions and environmental impacts. I have an example here from pumped storage hydropower, where you're creating a lot of energy, say from a lot of photovoltaic panels. You pump water up and then you let it run back down when you're out of energy. And that's a really cool technology, but it has a lot of environmental impacts. And that's something we asked authors to discuss. We also asked them to discuss development and broader usage. For instance, providing readers a resource to find where all the different projects of some type are. We did this with something called grid enhancing technologies, which basically get plugged into the power grid and make things work a bit better without having to install a bunch of new power lines. And we also ask authors to talk about things like economics and industry. A lot of the technologies that we discuss are not going to be as cost effective yet as some of the technologies we've already scaled and perfected over the years. So having this discussion, we feel is going to be really helpful in taking the impact of these articles from just to other experts, also to folks out in maybe more policy or industry spaces. How we do this as a journal, it will be similar to how other nature reviews journals work. And I was lucky to go first, so I get to describe this, and Alex can point out if they do anything differently. But I think it's a really fun way to work as an editor. And one of the things that really attracted me to working at Nature Reviews. We work in editorial teams of 3, and we're really hands-on. We start with commissioning articles. So as a team, we spend a lot of time discussing with each other, attending conferences, and figuring out what the status of the field is, what people are talking about, and where they might need a review to bring information together. Once we've commissioned from an author, we then spend a lot of time discussing article structure and content with them. Usually we end up having at least one meeting with authors before they start writing the article. And that's a great time to figure out, what do you need to see in the field? What does the field really need to move forward? And what are messages out there that need to be put together, and the scientific evidence that you can use to support this? After articles have been written, us editors will evaluate the first draft and will refine this first draft with the authors. So for instance, sometimes we suggest moving information around, or we might suggest that they do something like provide a little more discussion in some place, more referencing, or more evidence. All of our reviews and perspectives undergo peer review, which is quite rigorous. We get usually 3 reviewers, sometimes more if the article is really interdisciplinary. And we ask reviewers to comment on things like timeliness, if it provides new messages to the field, and other things that they would really want to see from a really impactful review for their field. The next 2 steps are something that I think are really unique to the Nature Reviews journals and some of my favorite steps. We do a detailed editing stage with authors where one of us editors will go through line by line and edit the article. And I really liked what Jill said in one of the earlier slides about these being teaching tools. Whenever we're editing articles, the first thing I think of is if I were a graduate student just starting my PhD and we're given a review, how would I want it to be this review? And if not, what can we do to make it this review? So we try to explain everything really well, make it really accessible, and bring the reader on a nice journey. One thing I always tell my authors is to make their readers feel smart, because that will really draw them in as they're explaining the status of the field and where they think it needs to go. We also have an art editor who's fabulous. He's drawn all the figures that you've seen in my part of the presentation so far. And at this stage, we go through and we try to make figures that are going to be really accessible to the field and that we hope are being used as great teaching tools or introductory tools. One thing that we really pay attention to when editing is focusing on clarity and robustness. Like I mentioned, this field can be quite tricky to handle in terms of some hyperbole, folks being really excited about something and maybe making claims that aren't quite backed up by the science yet. So when we do line by line edits ahead of publication, we ask a lot of questions during our edits. I've included some examples here, like, what do you mean by this? Or can you explain or define this point? A really common one we often ask authors to explain is, what do you mean when you say something is high or low or, better or worse? Can you provide quantitative examples? Because we want, as much as the authors are able to give examples from the literature, we want them to be able to put those into context for our readers as well. Something specific, especially with our technology reviews, is we also ask them to discuss drawbacks and limitations. And we tone down hype. So if we see things like paradigm shifting or revolutionary or extraordinary, we often ask them to be a little more measured with their language. And we ask them to explain what they mean by things like green or eco-friendly or environmentally friendly, and define, do they mean something's going to be more energy efficient or have a lower impact in terms of the amount of pollution released or things like that. We have quite a bit of front half, which is really fun. So for us, front half would mean mostly opinion articles. Comments are our most common sort of opinion articles. And we think that this is a really important area because, like I mentioned, there's quite a bit of opinion in this area. We're making up the rule book for decarbonization as we go. And it's great being able to provide a home for authors to discuss in their expert opinions what we should be doing and why. We also use our shorter articles as a forum to involve early career researchers. We think that that's something that sometimes gets lost in the actual reviews themselves, which are often authored by more senior folks who are longstanding experts in the field, but we love to highlight some of the up and coming researchers with some article types. We have like tools of the trade articles or worldviews from folks who are assistant professors or other folks earlier on in their career. And finally, as I mentioned before, technology doesn't just go from the bench scale out into the real world without a lot of hard work by a lot of really dedicated people. So we have some article types like what we call down to business articles, where we give people space to discuss their journey with technology transfer or what they've experienced when trying to commercialize something and take it from the lab out into something that folks can actually use. And finally, one of the reasons I love being a reviews editor, and I think we'll always come back to being a reviews editor, is we get to work with some amazing authors and we really love providing a good publishing experience for them. So you have a lot of time for our authors. We try to understand where they're coming from, what they're working on, and how we can best convey their messages. And we hope that that shows and that our authors really enjoy the process and hopefully learn something as well. And with that, I will pass it over to Alex, and thank you.
Hi, everybody. Yes, thanks, Laura, for covering some of the common points of our processes. So I'll try not to duplicate efforts there. So in addition to this grand challenge that Laura has described in terms of providing energy and technologies for the world while minimizing environmental harm, I think another important environmental challenge currently is the crisis of biodiversity loss. So by biodiversity, I mean the diversity of all living things on Earth and the ecosystems in which they live. So there was a very influential report in 2020, which showed that across a sample of about 5,000 species, population size of those species has declined by an average of 70% since the 1970s, which is a quite stark decline. And this isn't just an issue of charismatic species like pandas or polar bears losing their population and losing habitat, but it's actually, I hope I can convince you and your patrons that this loss of biodiversity matters to people's lives in a more general way. So the World Economic Forum in 2024 met in Davos, Switzerland, and through expert opinion had ranked the challenges, the global challenges that are most likely to harm international economies in the next 10 years. And biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse is ranked number 3. So it's a quite important problem. And against this backdrop of biodiversity loss, there is really important global policy making happening right now to try to reduce this loss. So the climate change conventions get a lot of press, but there's also a series of UN conferences for biodiversity that are quite important. In 2022, the UN Convention of Parties for Biodiversity agreed on what's called the Global Biodiversity Framework, which is a mission to and kind of a guide to how to protect biodiversity and prevent further losses before the year 2030. I've included the kind of top line summary of this framework here because I'll return to why this is important, but essentially maintaining biodiversity in a way that can still benefit people and that people and biodiversity can work together is a core part of this mission. Now, the framework as a whole is broken into 23 biodiversity targets. And I love this slide because it shows how these biodiversity targets actually fit in and support far more of the Sustainable Development Goals than just numbers 14 and 15, which are life on land and life below water. Those are, of course, the clearest connections to biodiversity and to our journal, but by improving the conditions of biodiversity and ecosystems globally, there are opportunities to improve progress on almost all of the other Sustainable Development Goals. And you will see this slide again when I connect it back to some of the content that our journal has been publishing. So where do we fit into this? While also publishing on some core topics within the general fields of ecology and evolution, we really aim to publish reviews and opinion content that help the community stay informed of progress on these global biodiversity targets and this international policy that's so important currently. So we do focus a lot of our commissioning efforts in terms of the topics we want to publish and who we invite around those global biodiversity framework targets. And we want to be the place that the community looks to see how we're doing on those targets. And even though the framework is only through 2030, it is sadly quite likely that not all of those targets will be met and that there will be a refreshed and renewed round of goal setting moving forward from that. And so in the long term, we hope to be keeping the pulse of what's happening in this field. With our reviews, we're trying to provide authoritative overviews that help readers understand and take stock of where the field has been and what progress has been made. And then our opinions and other formats can try to provide new ideas and new potential solutions that will push the field forward and show where we are going. And part of what we offer, like Laura described, is a lot of effort that goes into making these summaries very, very clear and effective, including through the visual displays that we come up with. So we try to have this be a good reader experience and have quite clear papers that describe what conservation actions are working and what are not. And our papers do often have, many of them have a large global scope to get a sense of what's working and what's not in different regions. But we also publish sometimes much more place-based reviews, thinking about in a particular setting, what are the dimensions of a problem related to biodiversity decline. So returning to this slide that I already showed you, in just our first 6 months of publishing articles, which has gone by very fast, we have published content that relates to 13 of these 23 biodiversity targets. So I'll walk through just a few examples of these. We have published several comments that discuss important dimensions of biodiversity policy making and the governance structures and how different stakeholders can interact to allow the scientific information that conservation biologists are establishing to be made more useful in policy spheres. So these relate to targets, biodiversity targets related to planning conservation efforts and involving participants in decision-making. And ultimately, these can impact the sustainable development goals of having strong institutions. We've also published reviews that highlight how nature, including in this case, wildlife species, contribute to humans and improve the well-being and health of human societies as well. We've also published on topics that relate to the global capacity for research and the equitable sharing of benefits and education about the biodiversity crisis, because the fact is that the vast majority of biodiversity of species live in tropical regions of the world that are under-resourced in terms of their research capacity. So we're very keen to explore how to make those communities empowered and to share knowledge across the global north and the global south. Returning to the theme of the connections between humans and the environment, we've published on topics that show how humans living in cities can coexist along urban biodiversity and how cities could be further developed to support both aspects of nature, human and wild nature. And definitely down in the SDG 15 and 14, where some of our core topics, which are about classic themes in conservation biology, such as restoration. This is so far our highest viewed and downloaded and cited article, which is about considering biodiversity in forest restoration, aside from just planting a single species of trees across large areas. How can we keep biodiversity in mind in those efforts? So like Laura said, we really want our papers to be as impactful as possible, and we think a lot about how to make them very readable. So far, this seems to be received well by the community. This is just one social media post from one person, but we've heard it from others that this is our journal is a great resource for teaching. And I think most scientists would feel that it is rare to look at a journal, especially an online-only journal, and actually read through everything rather than picking and choosing only the most relevant articles. Our authors also tell us that they learn a lot about the writing process from working with us on their papers. And what I find really encouraging is that they're carrying that knowledge forward and improving their other writing projects that aren't for us as well. And we do have a similar process to what Laura described, so I will skip that, but I'll elaborate on one element which I think is quite unique in our area, which is the support that we provide for the art and the scientific figures. So ecologists and biodiversity scientists are very often will publish papers in other journals that look kind of like this first one, which is a lot of nice photos of organisms. It's a very easy way to construct a figure. And indeed, this is the version of a figure that went through peer review and with us, and peer reviewers said, sure, that seems fine. But what we do during our process is to try to make figures like that not just beautiful in terms of photographs, but also convey important information with a very busy reader in mind. So rather than needing to go to the figure caption and figure out which small photograph on the original figure conveys what concept, those descriptions are much more clearly shown in our figures. So that's just another example of the way that we are trying to make good teaching resources and good reading experience for very busy scientists. Okay, and then another kind of core principle of what we are trying to do at our journal is acknowledging and trying to improve a situation related to these pervasive geographic gaps and biases in biodiversity science. So as I said earlier, so much of the world's biodiversity is in regions that are under-resourced scientifically. And if you're reviewing a topic in biodiversity science, it's very important to acknowledge that we have incomplete information over the globe about what is happening with a certain species or a certain type of ecosystem or a process. And so to address that, we offer authors a couple ideas of how to move the field forward on this front. At the commissioning stage, we ask authors to consider bringing on other co-authors that might be able to search and review literature in a different relevant language. Like if we had a paper on the Amazon, and we asked them to consider whether they could cite any Spanish or Portuguese language studies to make that review as complete as possible. We also ask authors to kind of acknowledge the importance of geographic gaps and highlight priorities of where more research is the most urgently needed on this topic and where resources could best be deployed. And then we also encourage authors, like other Nature Reviews journals do, to consider citation diversity in their work. So we know that people tend to cite research by other scientists in kind of demographically biased ways, and we ask authors to consider whether they have extended their search to include work from underrepresented authors. So just to summarize how we're approaching this field, I think we have a kind of unique scope and a unique approach that differentiates us from other journals that cover similar topics. So our narrative reviews are trying to be the most compelling read possible and provide opportunities for experts to weigh in with kind of critical insights rather than just quantitatively summarizing findings that have been published. And something that we've heard from the community so far, which I find very encouraging, is that our focus on biodiversity, and especially the connections between biodiversity and humans, is perhaps a more modern take on this field compared to having a classic ecology and evolution scope. We can still publish on those topics while really highlighting these important connections and tying in with the movement in the global biodiversity framework. So I will leave it there, and I think we can turn it over to questions.
Okay, great. Thanks so much to Jill, Laura and Alex. Yeah, I think we have a little over 10 minutes for some questions. So if you haven't submitted a question yet, feel free to put that in the Q&A box. And I think we'll start maybe the question for Jill. You talked about um, how many journals that Nature Reviews has launched. So what other factors are taken into account when deciding to launch new journals?
Thank you. That's a good question. So there's quite a lot of other factors that we take into account. So I'll name a few of them. So first of all, of course, we look at, we call it the publication market. So how many articles are being published across different research areas. And what we might see from that is some trends over time. So maybe something is growing quite rapidly or growing slowly, or it's a small field that's emerging. So we can sort of tell quite a lot from that. And what we want to take from that is this a field that a new nature journal could serve well? Could we do it well? So we look at maybe the volume of articles, as I mentioned. We might look at how many of those are highly cited, because if it's a nature journal, often that's the type of content we'll be publishing. And we look at what other journals are available for authors in that field, for example. And if we see that maybe there's a space for us, we could come in and create a new journal that would serve these authors well. That's a good thing to consider as well. So the community's needs, that is one of the main things that we consider, and that's how we do it. Of course, the SDGs, which we talked about during the presentation as well. And I think those are the two main things. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there actually, because otherwise it gets a little bit complicated, but those are two examples.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. Okay, let's maybe do maybe a question for Laura. How do Nature Reviews editors select topics for new review articles and ensure that they are globally and socially relevant?
Hi, Sabrina. Thanks. That's a really good review. Sorry, a really good question about reviews. We do a lot of, or we kind of pick topics based on different things. One of the more obvious ones is if there's a field where there's just been a lot of work. So there's some fields where you have hundreds or thousands of researchers working on something. So you're constantly getting new papers pinged out, and it's just really hard to keep up. And that's one area where classically you'd see a lot of reviews, because researchers are busy. They don't have time to read hundreds of new papers every month, but they might have time to read a review that's brought together hundreds of papers. Something that we spend a lot of time doing also is thinking almost backwards about it, where we think about problems where we know there's some research going on in the background, and then we think about, well, where are some of the big issues that people are tackling? And we might see these issues coming from, say, policy documents or from white papers from governments or intergovernmental agencies or something like that. And oftentimes when we start digging into those and discussing those as a team, we might find there's a whole lot of research on different topics that might cover the same thing, but we can't find an article that's going to bring together all the different aspects from different communities who are working towards ultimately the same goal, but just with very different approaches. Those are probably one of our favorite ones to handle. They often take a little more work because you're having to bring together author teams who maybe haven't worked together before, but they can be really, really interesting.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, it looks like we have a question here from Angela. What has been your experience with AI-generated content related issues while handling articles, etc.? And do you encourage scientists to use AI to aid them while writing articles? Maybe I'll throw this to Alex to start.
Sure. Yeah, that's a very timely and important question. I personally, to my knowledge, have not had any authors I've worked with use AI in the generation of their papers, but it might be happening. Currently, the Nature portfolio as a whole is trying to rapidly and kind of dynamically adjust their policies about this for all of the journals. And currently, the policy is that if a generative AI tool is used in the writing of a paper, you cannot credit the AI tool as an author because they are not a thinking entity. It is okay to use AI in preparation of work, but in our policy, but it must be acknowledged somewhere in the article. So that's where the portfolio is landing with it. I don't know if Laura has had other experiences yet.
Yeah, we have had some. Sorry, my hair keeps getting in my face. It's one of those days. It made it till the end of the day and decided to let loose. So we have had some authors who have followed the policy and have used AI to sort of tidy up the text of their manuscript. And that's something where, you know, if they're following the policy, they're using it to tidy up the manuscript and are able to, or, you know, document what they've done well. And all of our authors have been, like I mentioned, we work with them quite closely. So we don't have concerns with our authors doing this when they've told us. I think one thing I really like about working at Nature Reviews is that something that we don't necessarily have to do though, because since we do such a detailed edit, even before there was so much, you know, easy access to AI to do this, we're still able to help a lot with the edits and provide kind of a really tidy article by the end. So it's not something that we personally encourage our authors to do, but if they're following the guidance, we've had that before and they've been really great articles. But I think that's because the authors put so much work into them in the first place.
Right. Great. Okay. Thank you both. Okay, we have time for a few more questions. Maybe Alex, you talked about this a little during your presentation, but is the geographical diversity of authors something that all of the reviews journals actively consider, or just the new launch journals?
Yeah, great question. I think it varies, but I think it is something that we are all certainly being encouraged to think about, and not only just geographic representation of the authors we're working with, but also gender representation, making sure that we at least are commissioning from fractions of male versus female lead authors that are in line with kind of standards in that field of study. In terms of geography, I think some nature journals have it easier than others in terms of the likelihood that they can have authors from a wide array of countries, in part due to the differences in capacity and what people in different fields of study are able to accomplish in different settings with different resources. So when it's not possible for Nature Reviews editors to commission like full review articles from, for example, countries in more emerging economies or in the global South, something we can do to help empower researchers in those areas is to invite people to write shorter format pieces or opinion pieces that perhaps highlight their experience working in different settings, or it can be on a core topic, but it's perhaps a kind of a lower stakes type of format to write. And then maybe they'll get experience and be able to take that forward and write other work in the future.
Great. Okay. Let's see your time. Well, maybe one more question. This is a good question to end on. Jill, are there any plans to launch more journals?
Thank you. Yes. So we have 2 launching in January 2026. That's Nature Health and Nature Sensors. So they're very excited about those 2 new launches as well. And then, yes, we will continue to launch new journals until we feel that they're are no research communities that would benefit from a new launch journal from Nature Portfolio. So we know that at least for 2026 and probably 2027, we'll have some new launches, and then we'll see beyond that. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. It looks like we're at the end. So thank you so much to Jill, Laura, and Alex for taking the time to speak with us today. And thank you to our attendees for your questions and comments. I'd like to remind our viewers that we did record today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Choice and ACRL with the link to the recording and where to access today's slides. Also, if you have a few minutes after the presentation to fill out a brief survey, we would really appreciate it. So thanks again to all of you out there for joining us. We hope you learned something new from the webinar and hope to see you again soon on another session.
Thank you. Bye.